churches are situated. Everywhere you go in Northamptonshire, you will see churches dominating the landscape. None more so than here at Whiston, of course, where it stands on this high promontory called Cogenhoe and can be seen for miles around with that splendid double stone of ironstone and limestone on the tower there. Sometimes the churches are some distance away from the village, as in the case of this one at Cogenhoe, where the village was situated in this picture, as you can see on the rising ground there below the church. This goes down towards the present village, which was built in the 17th century on the site of an existing deer park. So the church now stands some distance away from the existing village. In this case, in Forsley, it stands in the middle of a splendid landscape devised by Capability Brown, and it stood on a huge estate owned by the Knightley family, who lived at Forsley Hall, which is now, of course, a spa hotel. The church stands in the middle of a field. The village is gone, having been lost through enclosure for the Knightleys to rear their vast flocks of sheep. This one has disappeared entirely. This is Faxton, which is near Lamport. That drawing there was done by John Piper, I'm sure you've all heard of. It was drawn during the Second World War as a landmark for well, the planes and so on during the First World War in a series of books that were produced at the time. And all that exists of that now is an altar which stands in the middle of an enclosure where the church used to be, in the middle of a field off a footpath, and you can go and visit it. This one, Stowe 9 churches, there are various theories where the 9 churches come from. It could come from a corruption of the word nen, the 9, or there were various other theories, but the most popularly held one is the fact that it was built 8 times, or attempted to be built 8 times, and each time the devil came and covered up the foundations, and it had to be rebuilt. So that's the 9th church which stood on the site. We're very fortunate in Northamptonshire in having lots of good building stone, particularly limestone. The limestone belt runs right through the centre of Northamptonshire, southwest to northeast. And just outside Northamptonshire is this Barnach Hills and Holes, which is now in Cambridgeshire, which was a huge quarry dating back to Roman times, which provided huge amounts of very good quality limestone, Barnach stone, which was used in a number of Cambridge and Oxford colleges, transported by river, and many churches in the north of the county have got some part of them built in Barnach stone. It's not often we see the artifacts which show artisans of the period, the people who actually built the church, but Helmden was another area where there were stone quarries, and inside the church is this window which dates from, it's actually got a date on it, 1313. The inscription says, the stonemason William Campion made this work of stone 1313. And there we see him hacking away at a large piece of stone as part of his work. And the church at Helmden, which is near Sulgrave in the southwest of the county, that dates from around about that period. As I say, there aren't many examples of artisans being shown on inside the churches, but here are 2 other examples, probably built by the same workshop, Misericords at Great Doddington, and also Wellingborough All Hallows, which is the one that's in the marketplace, a church in the marketplace. And these show a wood carver at work on his bench, carving away the emblem you see there, which is on the supporters on either side of the main carving, and the great Doddington example. And this gives us some insight as to the people that worked and built these churches. Of course, the main monuments to people in churches are of the more wealthy classes. And here we see Sir Richard Knightley rather, died in 1534, and his wife Joan. It's made in alabaster, which was a very sturdy material, and it was made in in Burton-on-Trent by Richard Parker, famous creator of monuments at that time. And it shows the heraldic dress of the Knightley family in its original colour. We often, when we look at churches today, we see very little in the way of colour usually in them, apart from a few stained glass windows added in Victorian times. But churches would have been full of colour on monuments and stained glass, on wall paintings, and so on during medieval times. The Knightley family were related to the Washingtons, and they, of course, lived at Sulgrave. And here is the arms of the Washington family shown in one of the windows of the church. As I say, the Knightleys were related to the Washingtons, and this, of course, became the basis of the Stars and Stripes of the American flag when George Washington became one of the ancestors of Lawrence Washington, who lived at Sulgrave, moved to the United States and became the first president of the United States. This is another monument at Stanford-on-Avon, which is on the Leicestershire border. And this is Sir Thomas Cave, the Cave family, monuments dating right through from the 16th century right through to the 19th century. And probably on Avon, it's a real mausoleum to the Cave family, as of course Fawsley is the Knightley family. And these wealthy landowners would have provided money to build the church and to maintain it and endow it, and of course to provide monuments to members of the family. Here's a piece of stained glass from Lowick Church, which is between Kettering and Corby. It shows Sir Simon de Drayton. Drayton House is in Lowick, quite near to the village, and it shows him holding a model of the church and dressed in his armour of the period. Dates from between 1310 and 1340. Although it's got some splendid stained glass, you'll see some more a little later on. He would have provided money for the building of the church. And many of these churches owed their foundation or their building to rich patrons such as this. At Higham Ferrers, we have, there are a number of misericords at Higham Ferrers, a large number. And here we have a portrait of Thomas Chichely. Thomas Chichely was born here in 1362. He founded a chantry college. I'll talk a bit more about chantry colleges later, in 1422, and also built the bead house next to the church in 1423. He'd become Archbishop of Canterbury by that time, and on the other misericord there we see the arms of the See of Canterbury. Portrait's said to be very similar to his portrait in the Bodleian Library. I'm now going to run through the various periods of architecture and show you some of the examples of the churches we've got in Northamptonshire illustrating these different periods. And we're fortunate that we've got, for each period, a very substantial example of a building built almost totally of that particular period. In the case of the Anglo-Saxon, which is before 1066, of course, we have Brixworth. Brixworth originally was thought to have been built in 680, as early as that, but latest research seems to indicate it was much later than that, around about the year 900 or probably later than that. As you can see, it's a very, very large building. It would have been a monastic foundation. It was supposedly provided by the monks of Peterborough, and you can see there it. If you look at the wall on the south side there on the left, it was much bigger than it is now. It's got an apse at the end as well, and it was in the form of a Roman basilica. And it's referred to by one writer as the finest architectural monument dating from before the conquest, surviving north of the Alps. So a very, very important, substantial building. Here we see in closer detail that south side, and you can see the line there of what would have been an extension out to this side. There would have been side compartments, and there the monks would have gone about their business, each with their own separate sort of compartment. Small doorway there you see on the right shows the archway built of Roman bricks. And the Saxons often reused Roman bricks. There was a filler in Brixworth. Some of the bricks have been shown to have come from the Jury Wall in Leicester, and they came from quite a way away, and various other stones were used to build the building. It was quite an impressive building. There we see on the picture on the left, the Saxon Tower, which is the lower part of the tower. And sometime late in the Saxon period, a semicircular turret was built to allow access to a story above the ground floor of the tower on the first floor, and enable you to get into there through the turret from inside the church. That was the only means of access. And you can see, looking at the west end of the church there in the interior, that gallery, that upper floor of the tower, which the turret gave access to, from which the lord of the manor would be able to look out, and the important members of the monastery look down on the proceedings below. There's a detail of it. You can see it's got the again these Roman tiles used in the archways, and those rather roughly hewn shafts, which are called baluster shafts. These are very typical of the Saxon period of architecture, and that shows them in a very good detail. There's another semicircular turret, very at Brigstock, very similar. There are only 4 Saxon turrets surviving in England. 2 are in Lincolnshire, up on the hill near Grantham, and at Broughton by Brigg in the north of Lincolnshire. And we've got the other 2 in Brixworth and in Brigstock. Another very impressive Saxon building is this one. This is the Anglo-Saxon Tower at Earl's Barton. As you can see, it very much looks like a matchstick model, really, and it probably would have been a similar structure built of wood originally. But by the end of the Saxon period, we had bells being used in churches, so bell towers became a regular feature. This one has got, it's probably the best example surviving of a Saxon tower anywhere in the country. And it's got all the features which are typical of Saxon architecture. It would have been a very important site of fortification, probably dating back prior to the church. This Norman mound, which on the west side here, is a fortification, but it would probably have been used partly for worship, but also for a place of refuge for the people of the village during late Saxon period. Here we see some of the features of the upper part of the tower. If you look at the corners of the tower, there you've got alternately laid vertical and horizontal stones forming the cornerstones, and that is referred to as long and short work. You've also got this sort of strip work on the outside of the tower as well, which they're known as pilaster strips. And again, looking at the openings to the bell tower at the top, you've got the pilaster shafts again. And at the bottom of that story of the tower, each story of the tower was divided by a string course as well, which you can see there, which is a layer of stone between each one. And there's a triangular-headed doorway as well. It was the only period in architecture of churches which had triangular doorways as well as circular ones. Here's the Saxon doorway at the west end of the tower, and it gives some impression on how thick the walls were. And again, you've got that pilaster strip work going around the outside, decorating the doorway. You've got what we call the imposts, like the capitals at the top there, with little bits of arcading on. That's a very good example of a Saxon doorway. A little billing, we've got a font which is inscribed, which again is extremely rare. It's Saxon. It's rare to have Saxon fonts. It's even rarer to have them with an inscription on. And this one has got inscribed, "Wigbertus, the builder and craftsman, wrought this. Whoever comes to immerse his body, no doubt gains." So it's got an inscription relating to the Wigbert who built it or made it, and also reference to its use as a place of baptism. Right, we move on to the Norman period now, 1066 to 1200. And again, we've got a very good example of a Norman church in St. Peter at Northampton. Unfortunately, it got vandalised this week. There was some publicity in the news and so on. One of the stained glass windows got smashed at the east end. But it's a very good example, as I say, of a Norman church. Probably a Saxon church was there earlier on the site, attached to the castle, which was nearby. It's got that arcading, which you can see, Norman arcading, running around the building in a couple of layers there. And it's got, again, the banded ironstone and limestone at the base of the tower, which is very much a Northamptonshire feature. Inside, what typifies Norman is the round pillars and the round arches here, picked out in different coloured stone. You've got the archway there to the tower at the west end, which has got several orders to it, which are very highly decorated, as you can see there, with the capitals. And it's got a series, there's a closer view of the arch with the 3 different orders and that zigzag carving going around the outside. We get carving coming into the churches during the Norman period, far more than in the Saxon. And it's got a number of these very, very decorative capitals inside, all of which are different. They have got these sort of interlacing animals, these sort of grotesque animals, which are very much harking back to the Saxon period in the sort of thing you find on manuscript decoration, for example. And these are very, very good examples of carved Norman capitals. Northampton, the Holy Sepulchre, was founded by Simon de Senlis, the first Earl of Northampton, after he returned from the First Crusade. And of course, it's based on the round church of Jerusalem, which was captured back from the Turks. And there are only 4 surviving round churches in the country. So again, Northampton's got a pretty unique distinction in this respect. The others are at the Temple Church in London. There's a Holy Sepulchre in Cambridge, and there's also a tiny little one at Little Maplestead village in Essex. There's also a ruined one at Ludlow Castle. But as I say, this was built by Simon de Senlis when he returned from the Crusades. So it's very much based on the round church in Jerusalem. And there we see the interior with these, again, massive round arches, although the ones at the back there have been rebuilt in more Gothic style. And you've got the capitals there, again, which have got some decoration on, although not with sculptural scenes like at St. Peter's. This may not look particularly interesting, but the stone on the right there, during medieval times, there was no proper seating in the church for the ordinary people. You had to stand during worship. But around that small piece of stone next to that pillar on the right there is the remains of a small stone wall which ran around the outside of the round nave of Holy Sepulchre. And the old and the infirm were allowed to sit on this wall, and that's where we get the expression, the weakest go to the wall, from. This is Wakeley Church, which is up near Stamford in the north of the county. Again, we've got a very fine Norman arch there with a zigzag marking. We've got the round headed recesses either side of it, which again are very much Norman style. And they would have probably held altars at some point. This is now redundant, this church. It's under the church's conservation trust and open to the public most of the time during normal circumstances. And again, it's got these, it's got carved capitals. Here we see Norman knights laying siege to a castle, which I rather like. I like the horse on that particular one. The Normans also decorated their fonts, various carvings. This is at Braybrook, which is near Market Harborough. Again, we've got this interlaced pattern there, which again harks back to Saxon manuscripts. It's very similar, the decoration here, to what you find in St. Peter's Church in Northampton, and a very good example of a Norman font. On one of the other faces here, we've got a Saxon cross, which is very much like a preaching cross, which preceded the building of churches, and a man there eating a fish, which of course is very much a Christian symbol. Another very good example of a Norman font is at West Haddon, and here we see on one face of it the entry into Jerusalem, Christ's entry into Jerusalem, with somebody there with palm leaves and Christ on the donkey. On another face, we have a baptism scene. It's very rare to find a baptism scene actually on a font, but it probably will not have escaped your notice that this is something of an anachronism, because it's Christ being baptized by John the Baptist, and an angel there is holding his cloak, and he aside, but he's actually being baptized in a font, which of course is an anachronism, because Christ was baptized in the River Jordan. But a very, very good example of a sculpted Norman font at West Haddon. The doorway, of course, was rectangular in shape, and the arch above semicircular. So that space had to be filled, and it was filled by what was called a tympanum. And this was very often carved, like here at Barton Seagrave. I think it's actually been reassembled at some point, but we've got a face there in the middle between two animal heads or animals, and this is probably representing good against evil. But the tympanum was again another place where the Normans used their carving skills. And this is a good example from Pitsford Church. And here we see St. Michael, who is killing a dragon. And it's interesting because of, well, it's got the interlaced patterns again. It's very sort of old-fashioned in that respect. But what I find interesting is the fact that his wings have been discarded and placed behind him on the ground. And this is almost certainly based on the old miracle plays, when you would dress up depicting these various characters, and the wings would be put down to carry out the killing of the dragon. So they base their carvings not necessarily on the original story, but on what they were experienced at the time. We have a short period between the Norman period and what we call the Gothic period, when the pointed arch is coming into being. And here we've got the an example at Spratton, where the arches are becoming slightly pointed, and it's what we call the transitional style between Norman and Gothic or Early English. In Early English in the 13th century, again, we have an almost complete church built in this period at Warmington, which is near, well, it's on the way to Stamford. It's up near Fotheringhay, up that way, up near Oundle. Oundle's probably the nearest place. And as you can see here, the pointed arch has come into being, and we've got these series of pointed arch windows, very narrow in groups, which are called lancet windows. And there are some good examples from Warmington, with the dogtooth carving, which was typical of the period. And there's the interior of Warmington, which has got a wooden ceiling, wooden vault, and quite a nice carved screen as well, wooden screen. But you can see the pillars are now much narrower, and we've got these much simpler capitals developing instead of those elaborately carved ones we had in the Norman period. And there's what we call waterleaf capital, which is an example from Warmington Church. Right, the decorated period, here we've got Canons Ashby. Canons Ashby was formerly an Augustinian priory, which was founded around about 1150. We've got the remains of a couple of bays of the nave and the north aisle and northwest tower, which dates from around 1310, which is the decorated period, with richly moulded capitals and the arcading with these trefoil arches, these three pointed arches, or but the trefoils like leaves of a clover. And there we've got the, again, rather weathered capitals, but examples of the capitals of the period. Stiff-leaved capitals are now coming into being. Cotterstock is another very good example of a decorated church. The college here was founded by the rector, John Gifford, in 1338. And you can see the windows now on tracery at the top. And it's got a very quite elaborate porch, which there's a flowing tracery on the chancel of the church. So we see the windows are becoming much more elaborate now with that tracery at the top above the main lights. And the porch has got this vaulting inside, which has got a number of very interesting carved bosses on the roof. And inside, what we call a sedilia, triple sedilia, or it's actually a quadruple one, I think. And these would be used. A collegiate church was a church which was used and it was endowed with money and priests appointed who would actually come in each day and say prayers to the founder and his family and so on. And these sedilia are used for the priests to sit in, and they're very elaborately carved with that sort of pointed, what we call an ogee arch at the top of each section of each seat. At Findon, there's a strainer arch which goes across the nave, which has got those quatrefoils, those four-part openings on it. And this is very much in the style of one that you would find in Wells Cathedral. There are also other examples at Easton Mordit and also at Rushton as well. And there we've got the very much more elaborate capitals of the decorated period. There we've got the ogee arch, again with several lights, flowing tracery. This is from Findon, which again is built of a mixture of ironstone and sandstone. Very beautiful church on the outside. We're referred to as a county of squires and spires, but in actual fact, there are rather more towers than spires, about 60% to 40% towers as opposed to spires in Northamptonshire. But here's one or two examples. 14th century, one of Aldwinkle's St. Peter, which is a brooch spire, what we call a brooch spire, where the part going up to the from the tower to the spire is has got these kind of pyramid structures which help to form the stonework between the two. And there's the example at Raunds, where you've got that very narrow, flat sort of porch at the west end, which again is very much a Northamptonshire feature. And again, that one dates from the 14th century. A couple of later ones. These show the spire now being hidden behind a parapet in the form of Higham Ferrers, which was actually rebuilt in the 17th century a lot of these spires fell down during struck by lightning and had to be rebuilt, and that's a good example. You can see they've got crockets decorating the outside of the spire going all the way up. They've got these what they call lucans, those windows in the spire, which were used to allow a flow of air through, and also lighting if you need to go up and repair it. And in the case of Higham Ferrers, there you've got battlements, you've got flying buttresses rather, and on the other one you've got the battlements Kettering, which is very tall, 179 feet high, built around about 1450. The final period of the medieval architecture is the Perpendicular, which ran from 1380 right up until 1540, when we get the Tudor period. And a very good example of that is Lowick. Lowick, which stands on the road between Corby and Kettering, and it can be seen very clearly from the road, quite a landmark. It's got a splendid lantern tower, built at the expense of the Green family of Drayton from 13th right until the 15th century. The lantern tower, probably inspired by originally by Ely Cathedral, a more local example at Fotheringhay, which was built around about the same time. This is Titchmarsh. No, it's not. This is Lowick still. Sorry, I beg your pardon. We're still at Lowick, and then that shows the lantern tower with the flying buttresses, and very, very ornate piece of work. I think it's one of my favourite churches. And there we see the tracery now has developed into what we call panel tracery, and there are lots of different panels on this on these windows in the chancel of the church. Very large panels in the main lights, and then the smaller ones at the top. And that's typical of the period of the Perpendicular. Fotheringhay, and again this is another one of my favourites, built alongside the River Nen by Edmund Langley, Duke of York. He conceived the idea of a collegiate church attached to the castle at Fotheringhay in 1377, and it was later transferred to the parish church in 1415. That shows it as it would have been when it was finished, and it shows it's got cloisters. Again, it's got the lantern tower, very, very large structure. It was a college which was there to pray for the good estate of Henry IV and his Queen, Prince of Wales, the Duke of York, all the royal family, and for their souls after death. I'll say a little bit more about that later on, but it was a very, very important collegiate building. Of course, those cloisters have now disappeared. They were taken down at the dissolution of the monasteries. It's very unusual, the Fotheringhay, that we've got the contract which survives between, if you look very carefully at that, on the stonework there, you can see a mason's mark, which is an H. And we have a contract between William Horwood, who was a local stonemason, and the 3rd Duke of York, which is dated 24th of September 1434, to rebuild the church from the chancel to the west, and that most of that structure you saw on that model was made then. It was very much a mausoleum of the Dukes of York, and here we see the arms of Edward IV, King Edward IV, royal arms there, and on the left we have the lion. No, right, we have the symbol of the Duke of Clarence on the left there, and on the right we've got the white boar, which is Richard III, and the Duke of Clarence was, of course, the brother of Edward IV, as was Richard III. So this is very much a mausoleum to the Yorkist family, and it was built for the occupants of that college to pray for their souls during their lifetime and beyond. It's got a very good example of under the tower of fan vaulting, which is not, I think it's about the only example in Northamptonshire. Some very good examples in Peterborough Cathedral, which was how they decorated the ceilings during the Perpendicular period. The Perpendicular was supposed to be made, as a saying, a Perpendicular is made for glass, and those panels in Perpendicular churches would have been covered or filled with stained glass, and Fotheringhay was no exception. A lot of it was destroyed much later on, but in 1989, workmen found underneath the north porch buried many fragments of medieval glass from the period of the building of the church, and these show Yorkist symbols, the hind of Joan Holland, who was the second wife of Edmund Langley, who was the first Duke of York, the Lion of March, which was for Richard, Duke of York, 1460, and also, of course, the White Rose of York, which was their most usual symbol. Also from Fotheringhay, after it was the monastery was dissolved, the Misericords went to several churches, to Tansall, Hemmington, and Lower Benningfield, and here we see the falcon in the fetterlock on the Misericord at Tansall, which came from Fotheringhay, which was another symbol of the Dukes of York. And on the other side, we've got stained glass, which is been rehoused in Kingscliff Church, and this has got the hind and the sun in the White Rose and the sun, and also the falcon in the fetterlock, which you can see there, and also the Prince of Wales feathers there as well. This is Titchmarsh, a bequest of stone by Lords Lovell, who owned the manor and castle here in 1474. It was built around about that time, and you can see each story is slightly smaller than the one below. So it's a very, very well proportioned Perpendicular church tower, and it's described as the finest tower outside Somerset, decorated there with the pinnacles at the top as well, and a very fine tower which dominates the horizon as you travel between Thrapston and Oundle. And here, of course, is Whiston again. This was built by Anthony Catesby, completed in 1534. And again, this is an example of a church which was built completely in one period. And we've got examples from each of the main periods of architecture in Northampton of a church built completely in that one period and very little altered. We've got Brixworth, Sackman, we've got Norman, we've got St Peter's, we've got early English Warmington, decorated period, we've got Cotterstock, and here, of course, in Whiston, we've got a very beautiful example of a Perpendicular church. The tower was built first, so it's not directly sort of attached to the rest of the building. And as you can see, it's being built, the tower, of alternate bands of ironstone and limestone. And it's a very beautiful structure. And this is a feature that's, as I say, seen at Findon and Irchester, and also the Bede House at Higham Ferrers. And there's the splendid tower, see there, with those bands of ironstone and limestone. There's superb pinnacles at the top there, battlements, the perpendicular style windows, and so on. And there's the interior, which is described as probably having been built by royal masons, because it's of such good quality. It is very, very well proportioned, very light and airy, although of course originally it probably would have been filled with stained glass. But again, it dominates the skyline. It's a very splendid church indeed. I'm now going to move on to some of the interior features, which shows a little bit about medieval in terms of beliefs and so on. Here we've got the Green Man. The Green Man was a very popular subject. This is at Fawsley. Lots of good wood carving at Fawsley, which I very much like. And the Green Man, of course, was a symbol of fertility, the coming of the spring, and was a very, very popular emblem inside most parish churches, usually on stone, of course, but occasionally on wood in this example. Here we have some animal musicians and a dog eating from a cooking pot, some kind, and the dishes thrown around the place there. And this is thought to have come from part of the fable of Reynard the Fox, which was very, very popular on church wood carving at the time. Again, Fawsley, this is. Stained glass, we're talking about a period when very few people could read or write. And so stained glass and wall paintings were used to educate people. People went to church every Sunday as part of their everyday life. And so stained glass and wall paintings were used to decorate the churches, add colour to them, and were very much part of the story. Here we see one of the saints, St George, Taldwinkle St Peter, which is a very, very fine example of medieval glass with that canopy work at the top. Dates from around 1310 to 1330. And these saints would have been used as role models to illustrate to people how they should be living their lives and so on. And they would call upon various certain saints at certain times of the trouble in order to help them through. It's amazing that even in the smallest of churches and the tiniest of villages, you can find something really elaborate, like these stained glass windows at Thenford, which is on the way to Banbury. And here we've got St Christopher wading his way through the stream with, hasn't got the Christ child on his shoulders as he normally has. I'll say a bit more about St Christopher in a moment. But on the other side, we've got St Anne teaching the Virgin to read. And St Anne was really used as a role model to illustrate to women how they should be educating their children, and bringing them up in the right way. It's also used, stained glass, to illustrate the story of the Bible, particularly the Old Testament. And here we've got Jeremiah and King David from Lowick Church. Some very fine stained glass windows, again from around about 1310 to 1340, which is part of the tree of Jesse, which showed the ancestry of various prophets and Old Testament figures who were descended from Jesse. And here we have some female saints at Stamford-on-Avon, again on the Leicestershire border, again with that very fine canopy work. And these, a couple are unidentified, but we've got St Anne again with the Virgin on the left there. The third from the, or the second from the right is St Agnes, but the other two have not been identified. Death was very much in the minds of people in medieval times. Life was hard. People didn't live very long. Life expectancy was short. So consequently, it figured very largely in their beliefs. When you died, your soul would go to purgatory, and it would stay there until Judgment Day, when your sins would be totted up, Judgment Day, and you'd be decided whether you went to heaven or to hell. And people tried all sorts of ways in order to shorten this time in purgatory. And one of the main ways in which they did it was to get people to pray for their soul after they died. This is from Stamford-on-Avon. It's a stained glass window. It was a very small one. It was commissioned in the will of a vicar who was called Henry Williams in 1500, who specified that this image of Death Roundel should be put in the church and his soul should be prayed for during purgatory. This rather macabre kind of image is from Rothwell Church, where there's a bone crypt where 2,500 skulls were discovered when a grave digger fell into it during in the 18th century. There are various theories about these as to whether they were plague victims or whether they who died at the Battle of Hastings, but these theories have been dismissed. Most of them are medieval, and most of them consist of thigh bones and skull bones. And these were the bones which were needed at the resurrection on Judgment Day. And so people actually paid for their skull and thigh bones to be kept because they were needed at Judgment Day. And people then prayed for them during their time in purgatory. This practice was banned as a result of the Reformation. So the only other bone crypt I know of is in Hythe in Kent. This is again a sort of unique thing we've got in Northamptonshire. Moving on from that, wall paintings were used to illustrate the scriptures to people. Here at Crowton, which is between Toaster and Brackley, is well, maybe beyond Brackley, actually. It's beyond Brackley. It shows the massacre of the innocents, Herod putting to death the children, and to the right of it we have the Exodus, Mary and Joseph being departing during the Exodus for Jesus' birth. St. Christopher, apologies for the quality of that photograph, it would flash didn't quite sort of reach that far, but this shows a very good example of St. Christopher carrying the Christ child across the water, and that was over the north door, and you went into the church and you looked over the north door, and if you St. Christopher was a patron saint of travellers, and if you actually beheld the image of St. Christopher, you were supposed not to meet an untimely death on that particular day. So it was good practice to go and look at St. Christopher each day. There's a couple of details from it. You see all the fishes sort of nibbling away at his ankles as he's walking through the stream carrying the Christ child. And there's a mermaid trying to tempt him, looking in a mirror. She was a symbol of pride, looking in the mirror, and also attracted sailors to their deaths. So it's very much a symbol of evil. There's another example of St. Christopher carrying his staff and the Christ child at Ashby St. Ledgers. And there's a lovely eel at the bottom there around his feet. Above the chancel arch, there was usually a doom painting. And this depicted on one side heaven and on the other side hell. And in the middle was Christ sitting on a rainbow in judgment. So this is depicting Judgment Day. And it was a timely reminder as you sat there during the service what would happen to you at death, depending on your time in purgatory. And here we see some of the souls. Everybody was reborn naked at Judgment Day, and they were the same age as Christ when he died. And here we see the naked souls being dragged through the towards hell, with the devil there above them. And there is a handcart being carting lots of souls into the realms of hell. And go to hell on a handcart is where that expression comes from, presumably. There's a devil pitching with a pitchfork, pitching a naked soul into the fires of hell. And these are very graphic, these doom paintings. This one at Mears Ashby is a good example. And Judgment Days, Slapton again, some very good wall painting at Slapton. This one shows St. Michael, who is weighing one of the souls of the dead, Judgment Day. And on the other side, I think there's a devil and trying to pull down the scales in his favour to get the soul to go to hell rather than heaven. Another way in which people tried to avoid purgatory or get themselves through purgatory and give a good balance of sins in their favour at Judgment Day was to build these chantry chapels. And you would build a chantry chapel, you would leave money in your will. This was left by a lady called Elizabeth Chombra in 1489 at Aldwinkle St. Peter's. Again, Aldwinkle All Saints rather. This again is a redundant church under the Church's Conservation Trust. I think it's used for sort of church camping now, so it's used for that purpose. And that slightly different coloured building there is a chantry chapel built from the will of Elizabeth Chombra to provide a place where priests would say prayers for the soul and family through purgatory. And there's a more detailed picture of it. There's Braybrook, again near Market Harborough. This is the Griffin Chapel, which was built between 1520 and 1530. Again, a chantry chapel built by the Griffin family in order to get priests to pray for their souls after death. And inside there's a splendid wooden effigy. There's about half a dozen wooden effigies in Northamptonshire. This is thought to be St. Thomas de Latimer, who died around 1333. And a very good example of an oaken effigy. Wall paintings also depicted the 7 deadly sins, like this example at Raunds. There we see the devil, this huge, I don't know what it is really, sort of like javelin, like pike or something at the figure of Pride. It's Pride and her 6 daughters representing the 7 deadly sins. I also always think that bears a very strong resemblance to our present Queen, that head of that the figure of Pride in the centre there. But each one shows the one of the sins with a devil trying to entice the people away, and no prize for guessing which of the sins that one is. And that one is anger, where the person is sort of poking her eye out, and the devil is swallowing her up, and there's another devil as well by the side. They had originally had inscriptions, which you can just see at the top right-hand side there. Also at Raunds is the 3 kings, the 3 living and the 3 dead, which was another morality of the period. You've got these 3 kings, very elaborately dressed, in very fine attire. We've got these lovely creatures, rabbits, and at the bottom there. And by the side of them, the 3 dead. These 3 souls, skeletons. And this is a reminder, really, of however rich you were, you could still end up in hell if your sins were not, if you committed too many sins. So Judgment Day, pay no account whatsoever of your wealth and your, how well-to-do you were. So, it was a timely reminder to people. Also, gossiping in church was very much frowned upon. And here we've got Slapton. We've got a devil sort of banging 2 heads together of 2 people 2 women who are gossiping in church. Here at Gayton, Misericord, we've got the same subject, which is a very interesting one, because you've got the 2 people there gossiping, one of them with a rosary beads, necklace of rosary beads by the side of her, and you've got the devil above them, dressed in feathers. Devils were traditionally dressed in feathers. Oh, it's an angel, sorry. Angels were traditionally dressed in feathers, and during the mystery plays, and again, this was very much based on those. The devil is on the right there, actually, who's actually got a scroll, and he's writing down the sins as they're committed. Same subject, again, shown in a small light in a window in Stamford-on-Avon Church. Here we've got 2 women gossiping, and we've got 3 devils there in different colours around them, swallowing up their sins. Here at Wakeley, the same subject is carved on a roof boss. So we've got the same subject in many different mediums. Just to show you, it wasn't always women who were depicted. This is at Old Church, which has got a devil on a man's back, and there's an inscription above it, which is all chatterers in a church shall pay you for your weight, WEIGHT. So, you know, how much chattering you did, it would build up as a sin against you at Judgment Day. So there we have a flavour of some of the beliefs and the and so on, the practices which the church tried to promote during medieval times. And I think that concludes, and I'll finish with this image of Whiston Church, which is one of my favourites. So thank you very much for listening. And if you'd like to return to John.
Very good.
Well done, Douglas. Yeah, if you just unshare your screen, Douglas.
How do I do that?